Yeah, I think we're good. Well, let's wait.
And you'll shut that down and just
Where's,
leave it be?
It's 7:01 PM, and I'm calling the January 23rd, 2024 Planning Board meeting to order. I'll begin by taking roll call. So when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you're present? Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, present.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr,
Present.
Rick Mitchell,
Present.
and Marnie Crouch present. And just, I'll take note that Matt Hamill contacted me by email and indicated that he would not be available.
I turned mine off.
At least he didn't think so, but if he was able to cut short his meetings, he would join us later. So we will take up the first item on our agenda, which is a continued public hearing on the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District's application for site plan review, as well as its stormwater management permit application. So I would ask Catherine Hervel if she would like to make any comments, and then we'll turn to our peer reviewer, Tom Houston from Professional Services Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee member or board member. The first thing I just would like to make note is yesterday, Gale Associates submitted our response to comment package to the first package that Mr. Houston, the peer reviewer, had provided us. So hopefully we've addressed his comments and such and take it from there.
Excuse me, have you submitted that to the planning board? Because I don't believe any members have received it.
I submitted it to Patrick.
So as you may be aware, he's out of town. I believe he'll be back on the 26th, but I did not see that in my email, so it must have been just directed to him. So there was no way that I would have seen it so that I could have forwarded to members. So we don't have it available
Okay.
for our review.
We'll get it to you first thing in the morning. Sorry about that. I knew Patrick was gone for a few days. I didn't realize it was that long.
Well, and then parenthetically, if you just transmitted it recently, then I would surmise that Mr. Houston hasn't had an opportunity to really study it either.
Correct. With that, I guess, I don't know, similar to how we had done the last meeting, I know Mr. Houston went through kind of his highlighted comments. I don't know if he wants to move ahead that way, or we can go through his comments ourselves. It's really up to him.
Well, I think it might be interesting to hear from him and what he has to say about the stormwater management permit application. So if you don't have anything direct to say, we'll just turn it over to Mr. Houston.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I did have a chance to take a quick look at the response to comments today, and I must say it was very thorough. There's probably a half a dozen or so that we don't have a disagreement with it. It's just a matter of chasing down the information. So I think that response was thorough and appropriate, and we look forward to finalizing the response to the first report. We submitted, I guess on Monday, yesterday, our peer review of stormwater, and that's critical on this site, and it tends to be critical on almost any site. So I would like to go through the specific comments, but before I do that, I just wanted to make a couple of general points about the stormwater on this site. The stormwater bylaw and the stormwater regulations of the town of Hamilton strongly emphasize compliance with the Massachusetts stormwater handbook, and there's a couple of issues there. First of all, the overall performance criteria that are set forth in the stormwater handbook and the 10 criteria that all sites have to meet: peak rate attenuation, maintaining average annual recharge, etc. All of that is applicable to this design, but Volume 2, Chapter 2 of the Stormwater Handbook has kind of a cookbook section on best management practices. So if you have an infiltration basin, if you have an infiltration trench, if you have a catch basin, etc., the best management or BMP section of the manual tells you exactly what you have to do in terms of soil testing, exactly how you have to design it. Well, what is provided here, which is artificial turf athletic fields with a gravel base that's sort of being used as an infiltration basin, that's kind of a specialized thing, and there's no description or criteria for that particular type of facility in the Stormwater Handbook. It's kind of like an infiltration facility, but unlike many types of BMPs, we have to exert some judgment as to exactly what criteria apply to this type of facility. So the other issue with this project is it looks like all 3 of the athletic fields are currently in fill. The soil that's there is human transported fill. These fields were all filled up when they were originally constructed. For example, the softball field, we do have information on the depth of fill there, and it's 5 or 6 feet deep. So that means that the infiltration from the athletic fields is not determined exclusively by the natural existing soil conditions to a substantial extent. It's determined by this artificial fill. Well, the problem with artificial fill is you really don't know the quality control that was available when the fill was placed. Was it all nice, clean, granular fill? How was it compacted, etc.? This issue is sort of made a bit more challenging because we have relatively few test pits in the human transported fill to figure out exactly the depth to groundwater and the permeability of that soil. And again, there's no specific criteria for the number of tests that are required because this facility doesn't fit neatly into the Stormwater Handbook. But if we look, for example, and I'm going to call these different fields, the softball field, the football field, and the baseball field. It's simpler that way. Some of them are multi-purpose fields, etc., but it's just simpler to refer to them that way. The football field, 4 test pits were taken by Gale Associates there. In their judgment, that was reasonable. Now, the Stormwater Handbook, if this were a standard infiltration basin of that size, there would be 12 test pits required, not 4. On the baseball field, for the whole field, there's only 3 test pits. And on the softball field, there are no test pits at all. So we could have recommended digging a whole bunch of additional test pits. But I'm not sure how productive that would be, because with placed fill, you really can't tell how consistent it's going to be. the test pits we have actually indicate that this fill is pretty consistent and pretty granular. So that gives us some level of comfort. So our recommendation is, as opposed to digging a whole bunch more test pits, is to have the engineer of record observe the subgrade of each of the athletic fields before the gravel base is placed. And hopefully the engineer of record will be able to identify any abnormal areas, any areas where non-granular fill was placed, etc. The stormwater handbook is also concerned about fill. It says if you have artificial fill under an infiltration facility, you're supposed to remove it. But if we were to tell people you had to remove 5 feet of fill over the entirety of these fields, it would have a rather catastrophic impact on the cost of the project. So we want to make sure, though, that we get the infiltration right, because the way these facilities are designed, the runoff ponds up to a certain level in the fields before it has any outlet to the wetlands. And the converse of that is once the water in the infiltration area falls below the outlet, the only way for that last 8 or 10 inches of runoff to ever get out is to infiltrate into the soil. So if it couldn't infiltrate and leave the base saturated, there'd have to be some post-design modifications. So we want to make sure we get infiltration right. I think throwing that burden upon the engineer of record is the reasonable and prudent approach to that. So with that as a general background, if I could share my screen, I would like to sort of go over some of the specifics of our report.
Yes,
Tom, you should be able to share, yeah.
Are you seeing the report on the screen, I hope? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent, thank you, all right. So our first comment, and this gets back to the test issue, where there are no test pits at all in the softball field, we're recommending that Gale Associates excavate a minimum of 5 test pits in the softball field in order to determine the Rolls rate for infiltration, that's the permeability or the saturated hydraulic conductivity, and also the depth to groundwater, because to have the facility function properly, there should be a minimum 2-foot separation between the bottom of the gravel layer that's being placed and seasonal high groundwater. So, but there's no test pits at all in the softball field. We're recommending that they be excavated. We're also recommending that 2 test pits be taken within the infiltration trench that's on the north side of the tennis courts. An infiltration trench, unlike the fields, is actually a BMP that's addressed in the stormwater handbook. And the stormwater handbook says you need a minimum of 2 test pits for this infiltration trench. So we're recommending that those be excavated. And as I mentioned before, we're requesting that a plan note be added requiring that a Massachusetts civil professional engineer inspect the subgrade of each synthetic turf field prior to placement of the gravel base. Now, an aspect of the stormwater handbook that does apply is compliance with the stormwater standards. And this is applying also to the synthetic turf field / infiltration basins. Standard one says there shall be no untreated discharge to wetlands or discharges that cause any kind of erosion. So the submitted plans do show velocity dissipation at each of the outfalls, but we'd like the size and the size of the stone in those to actually be calculated and to calculate the actual velocity at each one of these discharge points, such that the velocity is less than the erosive velocity for the soil that lies beyond the energy dissipators. There's also one level spreader that's just to the west of where the tennis courts are going to be. That's being reused. So we're asking Gale Associates to inspect the existing level spreader to be reused. And if there are any signs of erosion there, to modify or increase the size of that level spreader such that the erosion is properly addressed. The second of the stormwater standards is peak rate attenuation. That means that the post-development runoff from the site, the peak rate, has to be less than the peak rate of runoff before you develop the site. And there's a table in the report, and the table is backed up by the HydroCAD calculations that were done. And it does demonstrate that the post-development peak rate of runoff is less than the pre-development peak rate of runoff for the 2-year, the 10-year, and the 100-year frequency storm events. So the project as designed does comply with standard 2, which is peak rate attenuation. Standard 3 is you're supposed to maintain the pre-development rate of recharge onto the site. That's recharging of groundwater. And the standards are, and the design as submitted does comply with the standards, storage that's provided in the gravel base is greater than the required recharge volume on the site. And the required recharge volume depends on the type of soil on the site, et cetera. So the storage provided is greater than the required recharge volume, and the fields drain in substantially less than the 72 hours maximum that's permitted. In fact, they drain in less than an hour. So the design as submitted does comply with standard 3, which is the maintaining recharge standard. The fourth standard is water quality, and what the Stormwater Handbook uses for water quality is sediment. They call it total suspended solids, or TSS. And there are criteria for how much of the TSS has to be removed. Typically, it's 80% for the overall, what they call a treatment train. That's all the different BMPs that remove TSS. So in this instance, though, all the stormwater standards in the Stormwater Handbook deal with stormwater runoff that's coming off parking areas and vehicular use areas. So that's really where the total suspended solids come from. In this type of facility where it's not normally subject to vehicular use and the synthetic turf isn't prone to erosion, et cetera, we don't anticipate that there's going to be a lot of total suspended solids in the runoff. And that was also the position that the stormwater report takes, that TSS removal is not required for these facilities. We concur with that. And again, this particular facility is not addressed in the Stormwater Handbook, but simply technically, there's not going to be TSS to remove in the runoff from these artificial turf fields. So we believe that standard 4 is met or is not applicable. Standard 5 is the measures you have to take for land uses with higher potential pollutant loads. There are things like industrial plants and shopping centers and that type of thing. The athletic fields here are not what they call a LUPL, or a land use with higher potential pollutant loading. Standard 6 is also not applicable. Those are particularly sensitive areas, things like the Zone 2 protection area around public water supply wells. That's not applicable to this site. There are special and more lax standards for redevelopment projects, which is Standard 7. This project does qualify to use the easier standards if they wanted, but Gale Associates has volunteered to use the more stringent standards for a new site. So stormwater improvements more than meet the requirements for a redevelopment project. Each project is required to have construction period erosion controls. This project does. They're pretty well done, actually, but we're recommending a few additional modifications. One of them is to submit a detailed phasing of construction plan, which limits the extent of the site that's disturbed at any one time. There would be a substantial potential for erosion and dust and all that type of thing if you stripped all three of these fields at the same time and just left them that way. So we're asking for a plan of phased construction where you sort of do one task at a time. We're also recommending in our comment 8 to provide fencing or barriers around the synthetic turf fields so that the construction equipment isn't continuously running over them. The idea there is to avoid compaction of the subgrade so that it maintains the ability of the subgrade to rapidly infiltrate the runoff that enters the gravel base. Comment 10, and this is something that we think is pretty important. We want to show one or more refueling areas, each being level and each being underlain by impervious surface with a berm graded to contain a fuel spill. All construction sites of this scale, they leave the construction equipment on the site while they're using it, so they have to refuel it there. So we want that refueling to occur in a location where if there is an inadvertent spill during construction, it'll be maintained and not seep into the ground and the groundwater. We're also asking for a plan note requiring sweeping of the on-site access drives and also sweeping contiguous segments of Bay Road when sediment is visible. The sediment is most likely to be deposited when all of the existing topsoil is being removed and also when all the demolition materials are being brought off the site. Much of the existing bituminous, the existing running track, etc., that all has to be removed. There's a potential for depositing sediment during earth moving and demolition activities. So just a requirement to sweep the pavement on the site and also to sweep the pavement on the nearby segments of Bay Road. Each project under the Stormwater Handbook has to have an operation and maintenance plan. Again, that's provided, and again, it's pretty well done. We had just a few additional suggestions. There should be a plan that's drawn to scale that shows all the stormwater things, all the BMPs. The idea is to use that plan post-construction to assist in the maintenance of all the BMPs. That's a standard requirement of the stormwater handbook. Our comment 20, we wanted to specify the maintenance requirements for the artificial turf. And they're fairly substantial. It has to be washed, it has to be vacuumed, it's supposed to brush the fibers so they stand upright, et cetera. So that was one item not addressed in the post-construction operation and maintenance plan. Also, in some facilities, there is a protectorant that's sprayed on the artificial turf to maintain the color. If that is being used here, we asked for information on the chemical composition of the protectorant to make sure there were no harmful substances in that.
Mr. Houston, before you go on to the pollution prevention plan, I did have a question about these standards 8 and 9 and how they relate to the special orders of condition that the Conservation Commission issued, because it appears to me that there's some significant overlap in what you are suggesting be included in the stormwater management permit application and what the Conservation Commission is requiring.
Yeah, the overlap is, well, it's sort of inadvertently intentional. The planning board's role, as I view it, is to ensure compliance with the Hamilton bylaw and regulations. And we would include things in our report, and also we would anticipate the planning board would include in its decision items which replicate those conditions in the order of conditions from the Concom. So the way we did the report is to include some of the same things here.
Right, so you did have one comment, though, which was to provide an estimated operations and maintenance budget. And I know
Yes.
in the Concom's, their orders of conditions, they require a significant amount of testing before construction begins and during construction and after construction for PFAS chemicals in the waterways. So I would think that that testing should be part of the operations and maintenance budget.
Yeah, I think that's point well taken, yes.
And also, as part of the budget, that would be obviously, the maintenance requirements. And it would also be important to know whether or not the products that are being used in the maintenance of the synthetic turf are safe as well, to identify those products so that
I'd like to
there's
speak to
no
that.
risk.
If I could, we do not use any cleaning products at all on the synthetic turf. They are treated just like a grass field where the UV light is what cleans the surfaces, just like a grass field. And we do not use any type of spray to maintain color or anything. We've never used that. We never specify it at Gale Associates. I don't know if someone else does, but this field will not have those. And we never specify the color. We don't vacuum the field. The only thing we do as far as maintenance, say someone were to get a cut or something, you rinse it with water, and we let the UV lights take care of it. And then we do brush it, kind of just to fluff up what we call the infill. But that's really all the maintenance that's associated with it.
I was just thinking, sometimes flocks of geese, they land on grass. I don't know. if
They don't like
could-
turf fields. They hate them.
appears to land on synthetic
yeah.
turf, but, I mean, that would be a reason to clean the fields potentially, but.
Yeah, the existing fields are heavily impacted by the geese, but I believe that is correct. One of the reasons the geese are there is they actually eat the vegetation. And putting in the artificial turf does have the benefit of pretty much eliminating the problem of geese using the fields, is my understanding.
That's correct.
Please continue, and I didn't mean to get you off track, Mr. Houston.
No, I think your points were well taken. I think it was helpful to discuss that at this point. Let's see, oh, yes, okay. Moving back to the long-term pollution prevention plan. We're recommending that road salt simply not be used, sodium chloride, in the maintenance of these facilities. It seems like it probably wouldn't be necessary because I wouldn't think these fields would typically be used during the heart of winter. So I don't think an outright prohibition on sodium chloride would be particularly impactful to operations here. Gale Associates did address this in their report, but the language was, I think, not strong enough that it's really enforceable. It says, whenever possible, the use of environmental friendly alternatives, et cetera, will be considered. So that's not really enforceable, I think. So we just said prohibit sodium chloride. So the school officials may have some input in that area, but I'm not thinking it will really impact the fields if we simply don't allow it. And, you know, there's just the wetlands are so heavily intertwined with the athletic facilities that it's probably an appropriate site to think about a salt ban during the winter.
I had excuse me, I had a question about that because I didn't see the long-term pollution prevention plan in Gale Associates materials, and in fact, my recollection is that it indicated that it would be up to the contractor to produce that plan, so.
No, the plan's it was in the submittal package. He wouldn't have reviewed it if it wasn't there. Tom, you had it in your package.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is the SWPPP, which is the construction phase plan that has to be submitted to US EPA for construction phase mitigation. The report, the Gale Associates report, did suggest that that document be prepared by the construction contractor.
Right.
And in our experience, that actually works out pretty well because once you've selected a construction contractor, that entity knows how they're going to build the site, and how they build the site relates directly to sedimentation and erosion issues. So leaving that up to the contractor is something that we see a lot, and it's something that seems to work out pretty well. So there's a lot of plans here to get confused about, but there was a long-term pollution prevention plan that we reviewed. As I say, it was well done, but we had the above comments that we wanted to see added to the plan.
Well, could you just tell me where that is in your package, because I didn't see it as one of the attachments.
It's not, it should be right near the end. It's probably right behind the irregular maintenance plan, it should say.
Well, if it's there.
I can show it to you after, if that's okay.
It's not important.
Okay, all right.
I was just confused because on the one hand, the contractor was going to produce it, and then I see a comment with respect to it,
Yep.
but we can move on.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, the 10th of the stormwater standards is there has to be a certification that there are no illicit discharges to the stormwater system. Specifically, nobody's connecting and disposing of sanitary sewage using the stormwater system as a vehicle to do that. So there is an illicit discharge compliance statement. It is in the Gale Associates document. It is unsigned. They said that the construction contractor will sign it when the construction is complete. So that provides a mechanism for compliance with standard 10. So having gone through the standards, we had some comments on the individual BMPs, on the individual best management practices. The first one is, first comments are on the athletic field infiltration systems. Our comment number 24, we wanted to add a plan note requiring submittal of laboratory test reports on the permeability of the artificial turf. The way the whole hydrology of this site is done, it just is based on the understanding that the stormwater runoff is simply going to infiltrate with minimal impedance into the gravel base that's beneath the synthetic turf. For that to happen, the synthetic turf has to be highly permeable, which it generally is, but we wanted the specific product to be used to be tested to confirm that, because it's vital to the proper function of the athletic field infiltration component. There were some inconsistencies on the plan between the inverts of the outlet control structures. There were some inconsistencies between the plan sheets, the construction details, and the HydroCAD calculations. So we just requested that they all be coordinated and having the same numbers everywhere. We had some comments on the infiltration trench for the tennis courts. Again, that's the way it works. The stormwater runoff from the tennis court sheet flows across the tennis courts and goes into a trench that's on the north side of the tennis courts. So we asked that a minimum of 2 test pits be excavated. Again, infiltration trenches are in the stormwater handbook. They require 2 test pits, so that's just following the stormwater handbook rules. And then depending on what the test pits show, they'll tell us what the permeability or the saturated hydraulic conductivity is of the soils around the trench. It'll also tell us the depth to groundwater, and that is probably going to have to be revised. The way we looked at it, the bottom of stone of the infiltration trench is supposed to be 2 foot above seasonal high groundwater. There's a nearby wetland, and you know that groundwater is probably be within a foot or so of the wetland surface, and the bottom of stone isn't shown on the plan, but it is included in the HydroCAD calculation saying the bottom of stone is elevation 91. If it is 91, there is a chance that not only is the 2 foot separation not provided, it looks like that elevation 91 may actually be down a couple of feet into the groundwater. So the test pits will take care of all that. It'll tell us where seasonal high groundwater is, and that trench might have to be redesigned. The other aspect of the redesign, the stormwater handbook wants to see pre-treatment of runoff before it goes into the infiltration trench. And that can be done with a wide strip of grass. It can be done with an upgradient sedimentation basin. There are different ways you can do it. The problem here is that that space is pretty constrained because you don't want to go into the wetlands with the trench. It's already pretty close. It may be possible to get some kind of a berm or something to sort of take some of the TSS out before it gets into the trench. So we've asked Gale Associates to look at that and see if they can come up with some kind of pre-treatment before the runoff is discharged into that infiltration trench. The Hamilton, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Hamilton Stormwater Bylaw and permit rules and regulations, the major thrust there is requiring compliance with the Stormwater Handbook. I think we're generally there, but again, the missing component is some of the details of the infiltration facilities underneath the synthetic turf. Finally, we tried to very briefly summarize some of the issues here with the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, the PFAS. And in fact, there are some other issues with artificial turf, particularly with the infill materials, having certain hazardous substances in them. This is not an area of expertise that our firm has in terms of coming up with a specific specification for the artificial turf. Gale Associates in their report made an effort to include information, but in the report, Gale Associates stated that they're not toxicologists. They're not really completely equipped to specify the artificial turf in terms of its relationship with PFAS and the bioavailability of the PFAS, how it may actually be transmitted to people who use the fields. So we are recommending that Gale Associates engage an expert consultant that can specify by technical criteria or by manufacturer and model the type of artificial turf that has low or non-detectable levels of PFAS, and also any PFAS that may be there is minimally bioavailable to people. I recognize that there's a cost there, and I don't know what a consultant with that level of expertise would charge to come up with this specification, but I assume it's primarily just research, no testing and modeling and that type of thing. So I don't know what it would cost, but if you want to pick a number, if the consultant were to charge, say, $14,000, it's a $14 million project. So the cost of such a consultant would be 1/1000th of the cost of the project. If they charged $28,000, that would be 1/500th of the cost of the project. So I realize it's an extra cost that the municipality always has to watch costs, but I think the level of expenditure to get the expert opinion that we need is probably a reasonable expenditure given the magnitude of the overall project. Finally, we wanted the Gale Associates to discuss the water quality in the overall Miles River Basin. There is a TMDL, that's a total maximum daily load, of certain contaminants, which include organics, meaning that the Miles River now has a problem with organic substances in it. It actually is a good way to look at a positive impact of the project, because with the elimination of the natural turf fields, there are less fertilizers and nutrients going to be deposited on the site, which eventually would make their way towards the river. So that's something we generally ask anyway, is to take a look at the water quality issues in the basin. In this case, I think those issues are going to be a positive impact. So I think that pretty much summarizes the key aspects of our report. Be more than pleased to respond to any questions.
Do any planning board members have any questions for Mr. Houston?
Might ask Jonathan.
Jonathan, do you have any questions for Mr. Houston?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My one question is, if after the materials removed in preparation for placing the gravel base, and it was found that the fill or the previously placed human fill was either inconsistent or inappropriate, could you, Mr. Houston, talk a little bit about what the procedure and potential solutions might be?
Well, it probably would depend upon the extent of what, let's call them unsuitable soils that might potentially be unearthed. Although we don't have a lot of test pits, the test pits that we do have are pretty consistent. They all show granular soil, which means that there was probably some care taken by the folks that constructed the present fields to control the quality of fill that was placed. So the possibility of extensive areas of unsuitable material isn't probably the most likely scenario, but there certainly could be areas of unsuitable materials. And they would be clays and silts and organics and that type of thing. They're unsuitable because they don't infiltrate runoff. So one approach would be to remove and replace the unsuitable soils with granular soil. That probably would be to a depth of 4 or 5 feet. If that turned out to be inordinately costly, it might be possible to recalculate the amount of discharge to the wetlands. Right now, the post-development discharge to the wetlands is a fair amount less than the pre-development. So if small areas of unsuitable material had to be left in place, that would just mean that more post-development runoff would be discharged. There are flat panel drains at the base of at the gravel base, the bottom of the gravel base. So if there was one small area of unsuitable material, the flat panel drains would convey the runoff over that unsuitable area to the area where the soil was again permeable. So it's really like any project of this scale. The problem with any test pit or any soil test, you don't know what happens 1 foot outside the test pit. You just don't know. So there's always a probability that you'll run into some unsuitables. There's probably a higher probability where it's artificially placed soils because you don't have the NRCS soils atlases to look at to figure out what the native soils are. It's more determined by the placed soils. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see what the professional engineer views the subgrade of each to be. The most likely scenario is there's not going to be major problems. If there are any problems, you remove and replace unless it gets cost prohibitive, and then you'd try to allow a little bit more runoff to be discharged. So I think it's something we're going to have to wait and see.
Thank you.
I would just like to note that we addressed that in our specifications to the contract, our earthwork specifications, that, we have give definitions of unsuitable material, and very similar to what Tom said, if depending on our geotechnical, we would have a geotechnical consultant. If we feel it needs to be removed, it would be removed and replaced with stone on site, so.
Yeah, I've actually found the artificially placed soils are more consistent than the natural ones, where we have clay in one area that's strangely deposited in an area right next to where there's some really nice soil.
Yeah.
So the artificially placed, I find, has more consistency. I guess in summary, it sounds very much like you're suggesting some conditional, some recommendations for conditional elements that it seemed like you are of the opinion, and you can confirm this or not, that Gale Associates have met in the design of the system, they've met the requirements of the Massachusetts bylaw, or the handbook and the Hamilton bylaw. You had comments to do some additional test pits and some notes to be added to drawings and some conditional elements that we can consider including in our decision or not, but it sounds like in summary, it sounded to me like you were saying that you're in support of this project and the design has met the criteria.
I think fundamentally, Gale Associates did a proper design where our comments are sort of around the edge of the overall design, looking for some, additional improvements in compliance. But fundamentally, I think they've done a proper job with the design.
And I guess we do need to revisit the people. We had made there was a motion about whether or not there was a toxicologist to be engaged, and then there was a KP law. I don't know if that's part of this conversation now, because there is a conditional thing being proposed here that we were basically told. I mean, I understand this is a good idea, but I also challenge what the criteria that any expert might develop a specification against, given that there is no.
I will answer your question in part, because
Yeah.
I read the orders of conditions that the Conservation Commission issued very carefully. In fact,
Yep.
I read them twice. And one of their conditions is the infill utilized for this artificial turf field shall be of a natural material such as, but not limited to, coir, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, core fibers, COIR, fibers, nutshells, sand, or cork. So I read that as eliminating the possibility that the synthetic turf could use crumb rubber as infill, which is a good thing. So I think that that the object here, because the science regarding PFAS is pointed in one direction and one direction only, regardless of what said, that the object here is to make sure there is no PFAS, or worst case scenario, the minimum amount of PFAS in these products.
But how do you define that
Well, I mean, it can be done because it has been done.
by,
That's why our.
the CDC
peer
gives
rev-
guidelines, but there's not defining the
That's why our peer
PFAS
reviewer
requirement. Yeah.
is recommending that, Gale Associates engage someone to look at these products to make sure that we get the safest one possible. And there's no doubt that PFAS are endocrine disruptors, and there are other aspects to these chemicals that have quite serious health effects, and the science is developing month by month. So I think that it's a wise wise recommendation on his part.
Yeah, I mean, my kids are going to play on this field eventually, and I definitely do know. I would expect that the chemicals being used in the field are appropriate for its purpose. I just you're saying what you've exactly just said. It's a month-by-month thing, and it's the technology that exists currently, and people
Well,
are.
some of the
It's a.
big- some of
I'm
the
not sure
biggest-
there's a specification that
Some
could
of
be
the biggest
written.
producers of these chemicals are getting out of the business, and they're being sued for billions of dollars. So I'm not sure that they will be made.
Why don't we see what the consultant turns up? We can't set a standard in advance
No.
and say, you know, the consultant will say, these 5 producers produce at this level, and some other producers produce at that level. We'll have to wait and see.
But again, to go back to the recommendations by the lawyers in saying that we don't have jurisdiction or
We're
the
going
authority
to
to give
follow our
in.
peer reviewer,
Yeah.
okay? That's why we have him.
But the peer reviewer gives their recommendations, and then it's our requirement to decide whether or not to move forward with those
I think that,
recommendations,
that
right?
personally, and I would suspect Ms. Herbo would agree with me that Mr. Houston did an outstanding job reviewing a very complex product.
I agree.
Very, very complex project, rather. So I don't know if anyone else shares my view of that, but I thought his work was very thorough. And so I think the object here is to do the very best to protect the health and safety of
I think it was excellent.
playing on these fields.
I think the focus on the tennis courts is also warranted, because that's currently is currently a porous surface, and it's not going to be.
That's right.
And so there's going to be a lot of runoff there that previously hadn't existed. And so designing the drainage ditches very carefully, finding out what's there, is probably pretty important.
Yep.
I think, I suggest we kind of revisit, you know, the vote again at the right time about the toxologist. But, Mr. Houston, I'm curious about your reaction. I noted the construction management sort of aspect to this, where you're concerned about vehicles during the course of the preparation, not go across the fields and so forth, or not do stockpiling materials because it could compact some of the subsurface material during the course of the construction. That's a pretty tight site because of the, as you know, because of the wetlands delineation lines. So it's an enormous project. And you're saying that working maybe incrementally, doing a part at a time would be a better approach to take to, assuming they might be a field at a time or something like that. But this is a project that has to work within the school schedule as well. So a lot of that construction time should be done maybe outside of school occupancy. Are you sufficiently satisfied with the operational plan on this, the construction management plan? I think it's a little sketchy. I'm not sure really what is stipulated. And then that, as well as the post-construction management plan, looking for what gets tested where and who does it and all of those details. Are they spelled out anywhere in the Gale engineering report?
In terms of post-construction, there are recommendations as to how often the fields are to be inspected, how often the structures are to be cleaned, and all that type of thing. There is not a lot of, if you're referring to like chemical testing,
Yes.
it's not something that's part of the post-construction operation and maintenance. It wouldn't be on a typical site, and I think that if the artificial turf is carefully specified such that there is not delivery mechanisms for bioavailable exposure, then I wouldn't think there'd have to be a lot of chemical types of tests post-construction. In terms of the construction phase, they have all the construction details. They have a construction narrative as part of the operation and maintenance plan. And I thought that was pretty well done. The plan didn't address the issue of trying to keep vehicles off the surface of the fields to avoid compaction. We added that. But I mean, that wouldn't have to be an absolute. If you had to have a route for vehicles to cross a particular field, you could simply mark off that route and then aerate or uncompact the soil in the one area where the vehicles went. You just don't want uncontrolled vehicle use of the entire subgrade of these fields when the subgrade is exposed, or else you're going to cut down on the effective permeability of those fields. So it's a general recommendation. The construction contractor, when they do the SWPPP, could address issues like that, like the need to cross one of these fields at a particular time. That's the level of detail where there's an advantage to having the construction contractor do the SWPPP.
Thank you. Just for clarification, this project is ready to go out for bid, very close.
Yep.
You know, once the questions are resolved in terms of the peer reviewer and
Correct.
our concerns. What remains to be specified then on this project? Is everything sort of completely specified in terms, have you chosen the turf material?
Right, I think I talked about this the very first hearing. Because it's a public bid, we can't say use Sprint turf. We have to say or equal. We have
understand.
done over 290 of these fields, and we write very, very tight specs,
Yeah.
which also include infiltration rates and testing before the turf goes in of the stone, all those things that, I think I'd like to provide Jonathan our turf specs so that he can see it, but what we require for the testing. So, we do the same thing on everything. Like I said, unfortunately, because it's public, we can't say specific, but what we do know is we work with, there's like a handful of like 5 or 6 contractors in this area that this is what they do. We've worked with them for years, and these guys know how to manage the site. They use the best, they have to meet the spec for the turf, and it probably will be a Shaw or a Sprint turf, which are all the, top of the line quality turf products that are out there. They have to be to meet it. And it comes right down to how many perforations are in, that carpet, which is the bottom that holds the grass. There's holes in that, obviously, to allow that to infiltrate through to the stone and then onward. All of that's specified. So, but we've actually, the draft specs are sitting on my desk, actually. So, but, obviously, we're trying to incorporate, your comments and make sure we've got everything covered, make sure we got all the notes and such. And I did just want to mention on the phasing of the construction, typically when they do a job like this, we had just done 2 fields at Algonquin last summer. They will move from field to field, but they theoretically, to make the timeframes that we have, because we're hoping to start in the spring sometimes and hopefully wrap it up maybe late fall, maybe a little bit later, obviously weather dependent and such. But we typically will be taking the topsoil off the first field, move right to the next field. The contractors has a process. Once the topsoil is gone, then they start what we call the anchor curb. The whole field gets surrounded by a concrete anchor curb that's 15 feet deep. So once that curb's in, all that in between disturbed area within the field it can't flow anywhere. You know, it acts almost like a sediment basin until, you know, the stone and, you know, they pile up the layers. So that helps to, you know, manage the site, but that's how they go. And one of the other things I know, Tom had talked about removing asphalt. We plan to recycle, other than the track surface that needs to be scraped off because of its elements. All the existing asphalt of the track is going to be reclaimed and reused to save money on the project. So none of that will be going off-site. So I just wanted to understand. We will provide. We can provide a more detailed explanation, kind of the process. I know we have some of it. We probably can expand on that, and we will. And I guess just stepping back to the PFAS, I know we've stated that we haven't worked with, that we're not toxicologists, we're not. But on previous projects, including Norton and Algonquin, we worked with both Weston and Sampson and the Beta Group to help us, to give us guidance on how to write our specifications for the testing of the turf, you know, based on the current regulations and the current testing protocol. As we all know, it's changing daily, but that's what we rely on. So we do have a letter that we did have developed by Weston Sampson regarding the elements of PFAS in the turf, and I don't think we included it. I wish we did, but I will provide it to the board.
Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Well, could you identify yourself?
I'm happy to. Yes, I was waiting to get to the microphone.
Yes, please.
Tom Geary, Director of Maintenance, Facilities, and Operations for the school district. I just have a question regarding the PFAS. If Gale Associates is going to be required to consult with a toxicologist, will the planning board accept it on face value, or are we going to get into a battle of peer review on that as well? Because I'm seeing this just becoming an endless cycle of we present and then we have a peer review. So just wanted to get a little more clarification.
I think we should ask Mr. Houston what he had in mind. I mean, we know what the Conservation Commission said. So
Yep.
that is a framework for what is acceptable. I mean, that's a condition that they issue.
Which we intended on following as
Right.
an order of conditions.
So I think that among those types of products, some specialist in the field can opine as to which is PFAS-free or which ones have the least amount of PFAS in them. Is that your intention, Mr. Houston?
I would anticipate that the guidance given to Gale Associates by a qualified expert should be sufficient. I don't know that there'd be a peer review of that guidance necessary, but it's difficult to answer until you see what the recommendation is. I think perhaps, certainly we would not undertake a peer review of a toxicologist. That's not our area of expertise. I wouldn't think it would be necessary, but I mean, that's really a decision the board can make after they see what the recommendation is. In my judgment, it'd be pretty straightforward. They're just going to come up with a specification, given the state of the art of artificial turf, what are the appropriate parameters to specify? And, you know, I can't tell you that. It's highly technical. I mean, one of the reports that was submitted indicated that there were non-detectable levels of PFAS. But if you look at the fine print, it said that what was being tested were the fibers. Now, was it only the blades of the turf that were being tested, or were there fibers in the infill? I mean, it's highly technical. It's beyond our area of expertise. We thought it was best handled just as kind of an internal mechanism of getting Gale Associates the advice they need to come up with the best specification. Sounds like they already have those relationships. If they've dealt with Weston and Sampson, yeah, they're certainly a qualified engineering firm, so maybe they'd be the people to get involved here.
I think the answer to your question is, once the toxicologist has reviewed it and made a recommendation, it's done. It's over. This board is not going around in circles trying to second guess the best available information.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
The only stipulation would be an independent, objective
Right.
specialist. That's the only, so I'm not sure that,
Presumably, that's what the toxicologist is?
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, they,
we're not asking the manufacturer
He may
to
not
give
be,
us.
he may not be reporting to us, he may be reporting to
no,
the school.
he has,
but he's-
right, he has ethical requirements, but,
Anyway, I think we're
Anyway.
done with this conversation.
And I also just wanted to add general assurance for the construction operations, not interfering with the school day. We obviously take that very seriously as a
Yeah.
school district. We're there to educate kids. And we will have, at a minimum, weekly construction meetings that include the logistics when trucks are coming in and out. But I anticipate those will become daily and twice a day stand-up meetings as well. So wanted to add some general assurances.
Okay, so just to sum up here, because we have other business, important business to attend to. So it would appear that there is some additional work that you have to do on the site pursuant to Mr. Houston's recommendations with respect to additional test pits and whatnot. So I don't know how long it will take for you to revise your work, and I do note that one of the attachments is still in draft form, and so when, that can be finalized, so our next meeting is, does anyone have
The
the?
6th, I believe,
March.
February 6th.
February 6th. So I don't know if you will be ready to go forward at that time, or how we should approach this.
I don't know if we can get the test bits done that quickly, but I'll have to talk with, we'll have to get a contractor and whatever.
Okay.
But it was our understanding the next one was going to be the public forum, or I'm just, at least that's what I thought we had.
We were trying to get some kind of date down on when people would know that they could speak.
Right.
Right. I think it might be helpful to have a completed package before we invite public comment, or at least more clarity with respect to the type of synthetic turfs that are in the mix, so to speak. And that's, in a sense, consistent with the Concom. But I know that the points that Mr. Houston made are serious, and so.
Is it helpful to separate them into two categories where one might be things required prior to decision versus, obviously there's some that cannot be and that would be conditional. Is it clear what's being requested to proceed in the next decision and review process, or is it for us to decide in review? Is that on our table right now to review what Tom has provided and give our recommendation on what we agree or
I
not?
would like to know, before I invite public comment, whether Mr. Houston is satisfied with the responses that he got to his numerous points that he made. And once we have that assurance, whether the work is actually completed or not is another matter. But perhaps, communication with Patrick, he's back on the 26th of this month. We have time to get that next meeting scheduled and actually know what's going to be on the agenda. So if you are keeping in contact with Mr. Houston and he's satisfied with the progress that you're making, the work you're doing, we can go forward in having the public comment. But I suspect that there will be large support for this project, but then the abutters and maybe other people in town will also have opinions with respect to some of the items here. So, you know, I do want to go forward with the public hearing, and if the February date looks like it's a good one, that's fine, but I want to be assured that we're not talking about something that's really still got some work to be done and calculations to be made and that type of thing.
May I just ask a quick clarifying question of the board? It was my understanding from Mr. Houston in his letter that the test pits were to be conducted during construction. I think that's what he wrote. And I just got a little confused when we were talking about test pits in the next few weeks. It's not
Mr.
it's not an ideal time to dig.
Houston, could you clarify that?
If I may, yeah. The observation of the subgrade by the engineer is something that we recommended be deferred until construction. You could defer the test pits. The problem is if you discover highly unsuitable soils, they require quite a bit of redesign. That's probably, again, not the most likely scenario. We have no test pits in the softball field, but the test pits we have in the other field look like it's consistent granular soil. So I guess you're not taking too much of a chance, but alternatively, to dig 5 test pits is a day or two if you can get the equipment and you can get the person out there. So if it can be done now, that's great. If it has to be deferred, I don't think that's too much of a problem either.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to say, so February 6th is our next meeting, and then the meeting after that's the 27th, because of school vacation week, we have a bigger gap between the meetings.
No, I think it's because President's Day
Oh,
is the
that too.
19th, and the Select Board is
Right.
meeting on the 20th, so our meeting
That too,
was
yes,
was
correct.
kicked back. So, you know, as it stands now, we'll get a report from Mr. Houston. You communicate, and if he's satisfied with your plan to address all his points, I think we can begin our meeting with a summary of how you've, you know, handled his comments with respect to site plan review and also his comments with respect to the stormwater management plan, and then go forward with our input.
When do you
from
think the
general public.
toxicologist report will be in?
Yeah, because that's important. I
We
think
just
people-
learned about that tonight, so we'd have to get that answer for you
Okay.
Right.
at least tomorrow. And, you know, we are on a tight schedule, so the district does intend to put things out to bid in mid-February, with or without approval, knowing that at some point we'll come to an agreement. But we have a very tight construction schedule, so.
And is it the intention, I guess, that sounded to me like a conditional element to have that specification developed by a third-party expert, not to be necessary, like if that box gets checked, that it is done, I'm not sure why we would review the information provided. They're supplementing a specification for the turf to be going out for bid, and that would be an addendum, I imagine, to the specification.
I think the
when you've
public is
identified.
entitled to speak what their mind about this project, and you would put it out to bid before you actually had the approval of the planning board? Before you actually had your permit?
We have a very tight construction window in order to have this project be completed under at the budget that we have set and that the taxpayers voted on. So we have to achieve some sort of schedule savings, and if we have to do an addendum or a change order and we run a risk, we still have to get in the ground and start this year.
Is that a 1-month bid? 1 month?
Yeah, it is, I think.
Yeah, I think what we have to do, it's usually 2 weeks in a day, but this is a big one. We'll give them at least 3 weeks.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine. They want to take that risk, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's,
I don't see there's a big problem here.
no.
I had one last question for Mr. Houston. We had a very nice letter from the Ipswich River Watershed Association that made the point that all the focus is on construction and design and engineering, And in the long run, it turns out the river gets mostly polluted from engineering systems that aren't maintained. And so pipes and drainage that was supposed to work gets clogged and never cleaned out. And so they suggest, I don't know whether it's up to us or the Conservation Commission, that in some approval be made conditional on some kind of a third-party annual, biannual inspection, clean-out, maintenance, or whatever of the systems. And so it might be very helpful if you would suggest a couple of ongoing inspections, maintenance items that might make sure that the system continues to work year after year after year. Is that a reasonable thing to ask? In other words, what parts of the system are likely to fail if they're not periodically
Right.
inspected or checked?
I have this letter in front of me as well, and, to the extent it was relevant, I apologize for not bringing it up. But what I think is appropriate at this point is I will make sure that Gale Associates and you, Mr. Houston, have a copy of the letters from the Ipswich River Watershed Association, and they did propose a number of conditions. And so I think it would be very helpful if you both reviewed them and commented on whether they are something that would be agreeable to add to this project or not, as the case.
Or you could find that these systems are basically fail-proof and we shouldn't worry about it. But it should be addressed, that's all I'm saying.
Some of those items are spelled out in our long-term pollution prevention plan, which is kind of spells out, which, as Tom had referenced, the BMPs, it's kind of the outlet structures, things like that, that they be checked so often or checked after certain storms and such. The only thing I'll comment, what's different about these fields is they don't get sediment. What rain falls on them is basically what, goes through the system and out the discharge eventually, if it goes out, depending on the size of the storm. So it's not like a grass field where, you'd have disturbance and you'd get more sediment. That's all I would just say. I mean, there's some small areas, obviously, around the fields that, yes, some of the structures could.
Okay, so let's continue this conversation then on the 6th, and at that point, if we have perhaps a half an hour to address all these outstanding issues, and then we can go to public comment. And the 6th will only be focused on this stormwater management permit. So if I could have entertain a motion to continue the hearing on the stormwater management plan and the site plan review application to February 6th, I would appreciate it.
I move that we continue this discussion to the next meeting on the February 6th.
I second.
When I call your name, would you indicate whether you assent? Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Marnie Crouch, aye. So see you all on the 6th. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Houston.
So just
Thank you.
to clarify, there will be public comment time on the
Yes.
6th? Okay.
Yes.
Just want to make sure people know that. Perfect.
Okay, our next item on the agenda.
Thank you.
is, our board discussion on the form-based code. So I believe that Emil forwarded you a draft of the RFP, and if anyone has any comments with respect to that, it would be helpful to discuss. I think that both the Planning Board and the Hamilton Development Corporation are very much interested in moving this RFP proposal forward so that it can get into the hands of the appropriate lawyer or person in the town manager's office who can add all the requisite boilerplate. So, anybody, do you have any comments?
I do have copies if anybody wants a copy. I have some here. Or you could read it online. I don't know, do you want a copy, Rick?
Yeah. I did get it online, and I did a quick review of it, but
Okay.
paper copy would be good.
Bill, do you want?
Did you have a copy?
I have a copy as well.
Right, so I think that, you know,
That
as part
you
of
want?
this RFP
Sorry, I'm gonna
process,
get in here, thank you.
my understanding is that there's an objective to include efforts that the town has made with respect to its downtown. So I really think that Rick, you, if anyone, might have some input as to what efforts the HDC has made with respect to the downtown, if you think it's needed to be inserted. And,
Yeah, this, of course, is just the scope of services. It's only part of the RFP, but, you know, it does include the particular steps that we're asking a consultant to follow. And I did an introduction and a background portion here for, that's mostly because the state requires that. They want to know, why are you filing an RFP? You know, in our case, we want to be able to pick the most qualified candidate, not base it strictly on, it's not like a bidding process where low bidder gets preference. But this is where qualifications really matters. And the other thing is to develop a little bit of the character of Hamilton so that an applicant or respondent has some background in a sense about what they're going to be asked to do in the community. So it was broad. But my thought was that, because the rest of it, I just tweaked it here and there. So it's essentially the same as what we've been looking at for a while. But I just thought it would be good if HDC had a chance to take a look at this and comment on it. And then, you know, put it in HDC's, and maybe, Rick, you could tackle the RFP if you want to do that, or ask Joe.
Yeah, I'd
ask
be
Joe
happy to. The question I had is incorporation of 3A into this.
yes, it's in there.
Well, I saw a reference to it, but in my read of it, it didn't really specify what we expected a consultant to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it references and say we want to incorporate discussion, consideration, whatever of 3A, but if we're going to be asking a consultant to take on that's a whole nother task. What is it
Yeah.
that we want them specifically to undertake and deliver? So that's a question I have in terms of just my quick read of it.
Sure. Yeah,
I think
it's
that's
only one.
reasonable. Are we looking for a piece of text code, or are we looking for a master plan?
Well,
Master plan within the form-based,
Yeah,
in
not- I mean-
essence,
it is a master
it
plan.
is a master plan.
In essence,
The
it
regulating
is.
plan.
So the question is, how does 3A fit into this?
Yeah.
And what are we expecting?
Well, I think, you know, just as weren't really specific about what we're asking them to do about developing a downtown, it was pretty vague, except to say that we think the form-based code is it.
No, I get that part. I get
Yeah.
that part.
So I thought that one statement about the 3A component just alerts them to the fact that they have to pay attention when they come as part of their package. So we're not trying to dictate, I think,
Well,
do this, and this.
yeah, I know, I get where you're coming
Mostly the
from.
process that we want to have.
I think that 3A zoning, actually, given the nature of the legislation, is rather easy. You basically say within a half a mile of the MBTA
Right,
station, you know, someone is entitled to build multifamily housing at a
No,
density
I get it.
of
I get it.
that. The form-based code portion of it is the complex part, you know, to actually do the standards, but
I'm looking at this as a defensive document, because the Attorney General is going to come down rock hard on any town that doesn't have had a town vote on whether to adopt 3A by the end of the year. So I'm thinking that we're going and saying, well, we understand that, but we're undertaking a comprehensive review of our downtown to incorporate form-based code in a way that dovetails, and I'm making the words up as I go, dovetails with the intent of 3A, so that at the end of this, the community understands what can happen and what it will look like within that 3A zone and the downtown in general. I think that's what whole thing is designed to do.
Right.
So if we don't reference that somewhere, excuse me, in the scope of services, I think more clearly.
I mean, if you want to add some, that's fine, if you want to add that. But the only thing I would say is that we don't know how much is going to really happen with respect to 3A here in town.
right.
We know what the law says, we know what the guidelines are, but we do not know how many units.
No, I understand that. As I said, I'm looking at this as a defense document, because the Attorney General is no holds barred with communities.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happens, there could be a dozen, 24 communities that haven't done anything with it, so it becomes, what happens with it, I don't know.
Well, it's
What
really
I'm trying to make is a
complicated because-
defensive document
Right.
that says, we are undertaking this, we're proceeding, we have appropriated the money, we've hired a consultant, we're going to do this the right way.
Yeah.
Not just arbitrarily just say, yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'll take a look at it and
yeah.
think about how we might be a little bit more specific about what that might entail.
Sure.
May I offer sort of a question and a kind of a thought on this? Could some wording be added to the RFP that says, we understand that this is a mandate, we understand the time frame, and we're asking the consultant to basically almost do like a feasibility analysis of what if you were to literally comply with the recommendations, what would that look like? And then what are your recommendations given your full understanding of your evaluation of downtown and the valuability of this? Is that a defensive enough position, Rick, do you feel?
It could be. I haven't thought about it that way, so I'm an open book in terms of what, potentially how it might be.
I actually think at this juncture, we have some significant issues with respect to 3A, and I think we need to consult with town council, and I'm a little unclear who would actually be assisting the planning board in this endeavor, but in terms of getting a 3A district adopted by the end of this year, we as a town are behind the 8 ball, and also we don't have a compelling story to tell as to why 3A is going to be beneficial to the town.
Right,
at this
and this
point.
is the story that we're trying to
Right.
construct.
And so I did attend a Zoom meeting with Kristen Kasner, who's our rep, and Patrick Reffert, and, tried to ascertain whether if we make this concerted effort, that the Commonwealth, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, can, postpone coming down on
Right,
Hamilton with
would
a-
engage.
with a Hamilton, with a hammer, but would engage with the town to try
Right.
and make this work, because obviously,
And-
we don't have an answer yet. obviously.
Is she going to check
She
with
said
the?
it takes 2 to 3 months to get a meeting with the Executive Office of
No,
Housing.
that's fine, that's fine.
Whatever, so that's the kind of the exploratory thing here, but I think that we need to proceed quickly
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, because of the funding issues. So, you know, if you take a crack at the drafting, maybe, you know, you could send that back to Emil or,
Yeah, so what might, what I think might be helpful is if the board endorses the general outline of this, then Emil and I can work on refining this to a point where we think it's ready for, you know, the HDC to take a look at, which will be, you know, I mean, I can circulate it as soon as we
Yeah,
get
yeah,
that
yeah,
done.
yeah.
So within a week or so.
right. I think that the important thing is to start getting the boilerplate.
Oh, yeah,
into-
that part I can do. That's fairly easy. You know, I can add that from previous bid documents that
HDC has.
HDC's
Yeah.
used, so.
That'd be
it-
great.
It just requires that I sit down and spend, you know, 2 or 3 hours looking at this and trying to figure out how to structure it and,
Would it be possible to have a joint meeting with the HDC? I don't know if we could get a quorum of the planning board. You meet,
I don't think that's necessary. I think the HDC has already bought off and approved an appropriation for supporting the form-based code, so they basically are waiting for
yes,
Scott Mattern and I to come back and say, this is what we have. We met with Joe Demalowitz, who said, you know, put together a scope, incorporate 3A, send it to me so we can review
all
it.
right, here's my idea. You work with Emil, and then let's get this to Joe as soon as possible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then, I think I think we should designate Emil as the planning board's point person with respect to
The RFP,
form-based
yeah.
code, the RFP, and everything else, because I don't think there's anyone in Hamilton, and maybe even on the North Shore, maybe in eastern Massachusetts.
Maybe in the
who knows
world.
more about form-based codes that Emil Dahlquist.
All right, all right, all right.
Certainly in Hamilton.
May I raise a question about this? Which is that, do we want to actually get this ball rolling before the school committee makes a decision?
Well, because, yes,
Why?
because,
I think it's such a fundamental pivot point, in how, you know.
because we've added in this RFP that the Winthrop School is.
I
merely
understand we could send this out, but if I was a consultant, I wouldn't want to waste my time until the school committee had made a
By
decision.
the time we're probably interviewing the consultants, the decision will be made.
Yeah. I think
Okay.
they will coincide pretty closely.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Which decision are you talking about, though?
Are you,
'Cause
were
there's
you saying
multiple
25,
decisions. Yeah.
April 25? Is it?
April 25, yeah.
So that's a,
That's the voter.
A year away.
That's the funding vote.
And is there, that's another question, it's like, there's a lot of cost held up in consultants and everything else from the town to,
Well, the
that have been appropriated to the school project, and this is another big, study, which will be a few $100,000 to engage on, and what is the town's budget and capacity for multiple studies of this size?
Town has already put in funding for this,
How much?
120,000.
120 sounds pretty light. They spent 200 on Patton Park
So,
alone. They spent $200,000 on Patton Park alone.
I just don't want to spend that money,
Have a
I don't want to
heart.
spend that money until the school decision is made.
I know you have a hard time with hiring consultants, but the fact is, we're all volunteer boards.
That's right, yeah.
And we don't have the capacity to do the kind of work that we want a consultant to do. We just don't have it. So unless we get outside expertise and manpower or people power, excuse me, it's not going to happen.
But I think I agree with doing it. I just, the timing of it, and this isn't the scope of work that I read wasn't $120,000 effort.
Good.
It was much more.
Well, the budget matches the scope, or the scope matches the budget. They'll come back and say, well, we can't do this, but here's what we can do. Plus, the HDC has appropriated a $50,000, so there's actually $170,000 there. So, you know,
Is it, yeah, again, is it worth spending before the decision gets made?
Well, the
What would
decision-
change, what would
There's
change?
a difference between the decision and the funding, am I correct?
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
for the school?
For the school.
Yes.
Well,
For the
the-
schools? So wasn't
Well,
the-
April 10th is when then the recommendation will be made
Right.
for which site is being recommended. Then it goes to the state for MSBA to confirm or not. And that's expected sometime, I guess, in November of this year. And the vote to appropriate the funds is in April 2025. So, and I think this is actually appropriate moving.
So we wouldn't want to spend much of that money until April 2025.
Well, no, but the consultant would actually, be given the directive that that town property that now contains the Winthrop School, at some point in the future,
It just will be incorporated.
It will be incorporated.
Whether it moves or not, it's
whether it moves or
incorporated.
not, next year or the year after, or in 5 years, it still ought to be considered as part of the downtown area. So if something were to happen, it's just that if their development in there would not be, it's unlike, because of the configuration of Hamilton, the sizes of all the other properties in town on Willow, on 1A, that offers the 14 acres where the school is offers an entirely different prospect in how you develop it for economic development. All of the others are just very small properties that have to be dealt with, and you're looking at loose ends and so forth. The plan would just go through, it would be designed complete, so whenever the Winthrop School site, when it does become part of a downtown, then that will happen at that point, it'll become available.
Well, the other thing is that it's already, if you follow Facebook, is the question is, well, if that site becomes available, what's the plan? People are going, well, what's the plan?
Yeah.
Well, this is the plan.
Yeah.
And it either is relevant because the space becomes available, or it's relevant some point in the future.
Yeah, right.
I think a helpful time horizon here is to think about 20 to 50 years, and things may change multiple times between now and then. And a thoughtful plan looking forward in that time horizon is going to be generally valid regardless of what
Right.
the cycles are of school needs. So
Yep.
for the whole town, and the Winthrop School is only one component of it.
Yeah.
Right.
I just want to say, today they voted on another school, so 3 schools on the North Shore have been voted down by voters. So Andover, the Whittier School, which is that technical school, just got voted down today, and then there was another town that voted down the school project. So just like the sentiment is kind of in the air a little bit for people to be really paying attention to school votes for new buildings. I'm just sharing that because I do think it's somewhat relevant to what was brought up about the timing.
To be fully transparent, the conversations are, this is the true horsepower behind this effort is the Winthrop School. The town is telling us to go through this effort because of the Winthrop School. It's not because they're hoping that the downtown gets some form-based code that 50 years from now transforms it in a certain way. We're spending money, we're recommending to spend money now to come up with a plan of what that school property could become. That is
If it
truly,
becomes-
transparently,
if it
the
becomes
thing that we're
available.
trying to do.
If it becomes available.
So why would you do it before the town decides it should be available?
Because you think that the planner is going to come up with a vision that's so inspirational that even if people previously, did not want to give up the Winthrop School, when they see this plan, they will. It will influence the vote. It will influence the vote. Let's put
Is
it
the school
that way.
board,
Well,
gentleman who was
as
just in
you-
here, that filled out a form that requested the funding that prioritized the consolidation of schools and the Cutler School specifically. It's not any analysis that was done, including the town. It was a board-driven thing, and I think that's where the risk of
I
it
understand.
being shot down.
I understand your argument. but it's not carrying any water.
I think, yeah, well, it depends on whose perspective you're taking, I guess.
Mine.
The people who vote to
No,
approve
I'm
these things,
taking-
or the people who think it's a good idea?
I'm taking the perspective of a planner who's looking at the options for how downtown is going to get developed, either in the next year or two or the next 20 years. That's the mission of the Hamilton Development Corporation. Statutorily is to look at, to develop the downtown business district. So that fits very neatly within it. There are other boards and committees, including the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen, who are looking very intently at the Winthrop site. And they want to know what potentially could go there. Questions are being raised by the public. If that site becomes available, what's the plan? We've talked about for years of rezoning that site for commercial so that when and if that becomes available, that it's part of the commercial district and that the HDC could be investing in it like it did with Willow Flats. So people aren't going to vote for a new commercial district unless they know what the potential is that could go there. So it fills a number of different needs going forward. It's not just solely on the Winthrop. Winthrop is driving this discussion because it's a huge potential, for sure. And so, but it's expanded now to the entire downtown. And it's now including a discussion about 3A, which we don't have, it's a mandatory
That's-
requirement
yeah,
that we
it's a
have to deal
mandatory
with.
requirement. So I think we need to move forward, and should we take a vote to just move forward? I think maybe we already have, but I'm certainly, to cut this discussion short and get
Yeah.
this ball rolling, I'll entertain a motion for Jonathan and, Emil and Rick to work together to finalize what we have, which is a very good start, amend it to, as Rick suggested, and then move forward, because the funding actually is extant. We have the money. Let's get this done. So does anyone want to,
I'll make that motion.
do I have a second?
Second.
So what actually is the motion? Is it
We're going to
to finish this, or
RFP.
to actually move forward with the RFP? Or is it just to?
Finish it and move forward with it.
Okay.
Okay, so when I call your name, please indicate whether you assent. Pat Norton?
I do not assent to finish it and move forward. I don't, I would agree we could continue to finish it and revisit looking at it again and decide whether or not the timing and scope is appropriate, but I wouldn't agree to move forward.
I take that as a no.
That is a no.
Got it. Jonathan Poor?
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton?
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist?
Aye.
Beth Herr?
I would also say what Pat said. I would like to finish this, but I'm not sure on the timeline.
Rick Mitchell?
Aye.
And Marnie Crouch, aye. So, Emil, you and Rick, make this happen, and we'll get it to the powers that be,
Yeah.
town council, and then when it's in its final form, we can revisit it and see, what the actual funding is and how, hopefully, that a representative from the planning board can be part of the interview process and that type of thing, so we make sure that we get the best consultant. So, look at the time. I really want to talk about stormwater management regulations,
Can I ask a question?
certainly.
Any update on Gordon Theological Seminary?
They said something today.
They sent us a letter, a very nice letter,
Yeah, they're like,
saying they want to kick the can down the road just a little longer.
yeah, so,
Well, that's news to me because I haven't looked at my Hamilton,
It came in like at around 2 this
Yeah.
afternoon.
right.
I was
So,
working out at the gym at 2
Good job.
o'clock.
So I can read it, just for the record.
Okay.
Dr. Barnes writes, Dear friends, we just want to inform you that while we won't have an update for you this evening, we, our attorneys, and the attorney representing the town, John Whitten, have had and continue to have substantive discussions. We look forward to sharing a mutually beneficial path forward in the very near future. Sincerely.
So is that consistent with your communications with John Whitten?
It's consistent with history.
Yeah, okay. Enough said.
Enough said. So it's 10 of 9. I don't think anyone has the, speaking for myself, but
The bandwidth?
the bandwidth to move forward with stormwater management regulations.
We also haven't had any comment or feedback from Alex as of yet, and I might reach out to him just to see if he's had any
Right.
chance to
So I
look at it.
think, so February 6th is the public comment.
Right.
And then I think our next meeting
The
is-
27th
is
after
the
that.
27th. So I want to ask everyone if they would be amenable to changing that February 27th date to February 22nd, which is a Thursday.
I think that's school vacation week.
Yeah,
Am I right?
I wouldn't make it, but
Well, you are kind of critical to that because you have the stormwater management.
yeah.
That is school vacation, isn't it?
Right,
Yeah.
and so I'm assuming you can't make it?
I'm fine.
You can make it.
I could make it, but.
So what do you want, where do you want to move it?
I want to move it from the 27th to the 22nd, because I will be out of town on the 27th.
That's fine with me.
It's okay with me.
Jonathan, can you do the 22nd?
Absolutely.
And Bill,
Are there any other meetings in,
Yeah, that works.
you can?
Are
Great.
there any other meetings here that night, do we know?
Well, if there are, we will decamp to the library.
Okay, great.
So we'll switch that date, February 27th to February 22nd. And then what we'll do is, when we do review the stormwater management regulations, we should have, what's his name?
Alex?
Alex.
Yep.
Here. Are they self-explanatory? To tell you the truth, I haven't really looked at them. I was hoping for you to give us the short course before I really looked at them, but if, it might be helpful if we studied them.
Probably enough change in it to look at it. I eliminated quite a bit out of the, endeavored to reduce the amount of pages in the regs.
Did you work with
Simplify.
Alex on them?
No,
No.
No.
And so Alex hasn't commented on them?
yeah.
Right. Before we dive in then, you need to talk to Alex and make sure he's on board with everything you've done.
Yeah,
Because if he's raising any kind of issues, then as an attorney, and, he looks at all of these.
yeah.
It would be worthwhile, so,
There's also a civil engineer at Hancock who's doing an independent third-party review of the regs on our behalf
okay,
as a favor.
okay. So that can happen on the 22nd, but I think our next meeting, is March 12th.
March 12th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't look like anything's going on here on February 22nd.
Yeah, so we'll do the stormwater management regs on the March 12th rather, with Alex present, and if he has comments with a further revised red line draft.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And so, at some point, we will have to further discuss after the public hearing, the athletic fields, and that might have to be on February 22nd. So, the only other item that I have is, I had asked way back in the day, the Affordable Housing Trust to take a look at the inclusionary housing bylaw, because the present iteration of the bylaw required opinions from town council as to how it should be interpreted. So I provided the Affordable Housing Trust with those 2 opinion letters and suggested they propose some amendments. And so I wanted to alert you to that. I think what I'll do is see if those amendments, if they were approved by the planning board, could be on the warrant. The warrant closes on February 26th, and I just don't think we can get that reviewed by town council in time to by February 26th. I mean, if,
And then have public hearing.
right.
Okay. So who's on the Affordable Housing Trust now?
Jamie Knutson is the chair, David Smith is on it, Suzanne Sofa, and another woman whose name it slips my mind. But it's certainly something that could go on the warrant for the fall town meeting. But I just, I can't see that we can get it done by February 26th with our present schedule. So, any other new business?
Motion to adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Who's amenable to adjourning? Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye?
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Hurd,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Marty Crouch.